Hello there, and you are all very welcome to the debut episode of the social media news show brought to you by Public Sector Marketing Institute in conjunction with Content Cal. And you can see my friend Andy Lambert has joined me. Andy, you are very welcome.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So the reason that we are launching this new feature and going to be appearing on screens on the last Tuesday of every month at 1 p.m. is that we both agreed that there's so many social media updates every single month that it can cause overwhelm, and it's not possible often to keep up to date. But this is where you and I are going to step into the breach, and largely you are going to do the research and I'm going to have a discussion about its relevance to government and public sector. So over to you, and maybe introduce yourself to our audience and let them know who you are and who Content Cal is before we get started.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I'll start showing my screen whilst I do this. So yeah, in a second, hopefully you should see this. So yeah, I'm Andy Lambert. I'm one of the founders of a company called Content Cal. We're a UK-based content marketing platform, and have just been recognised as the fastest growing in the space. So that's what we do from a product perspective. But the reason that I'm here talking about the social and digital trends you need to know is that one of the great opportunities we get, given what we do and how closely we have to work with Facebook, Twitter, and the likes, is that we get great intel around what's happening, what they're working on, what are the changes they're making, ultimately things that we get early sight of, but not everyone gets the opportunity to see exactly what's happening. So the idea of this session and doing this on a monthly basis is to give everyone a really nice level playing field. As Joanne's mentioned already, like it's very easy to feel overwhelmed amongst the amount of change that's happening across the space. So this is a kind of monthly session where you can be like, right, I can be all up to date over the course of the month, everything I need to know, and feel safe and confident in the knowledge that you know what you can apply to your strategies moving forward. So yes, that is a bit about me. So Joanne, do you want me just to dive straight in? I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm gonna dive in. So yeah, hopefully you can hear me. But so let's start with the trends. So there's a kind of format that we'll be doing in this is going to be running through these trends and the updates, the kind of digital things that you need to be aware of. And then we're going to go at a network by network perspective and really start to understand at a network level, so at Twitter, Facebook, etc., what's changing from a feature perspective. And also, very interestingly, I'll be giving some engagement benchmarks for each of them. So it's great for us to be able to measure ourselves against. But let's start with the trends. So one really nice thing that happened over the course of last month is that this brilliant report came out from Global Web Index. This happens twice a year, and there is so much information that goes into this. And it's essentially a 300-page report condensing everything that's happened over the course of the internet over the last year. So an immense amount of information, but there's only really 20 slides within that you really need to know from a content marketing perspective. So here's a few of them. So firstly, active social media users, 4.2 billion. Unbelievable numbers here, both from population growth, mobile phone users, internet users, and as we said, social media users. Numbers are sometimes, it's hard to comprehend rather, when they are that big. So the growth rates sometimes are actually easier to comprehend. So social media growth rates faster than anything else. So 13.2% growth over the last year. Over the last year, that growth has outpaced any years prior. Not any year, but certainly over the last 5. So it's clear what's caused that, obviously. But really, I mean, nearly 500 million extra users added to social, utterly huge, incredible communication opportunity we now have. And the number of social media users is fast approaching the number of total internet users as well. So yeah, huge opportunity here. Now, of course, as the social media usage grows, that usage and the way that people are spending their time starts to split across the multiple platforms. So this is some really important data to know. So this is your top 15 or so platforms. I think it's nearly about 20 or so here. The world's most used social platforms. These are global active numbers, and this is all about monthly active users. So data isn't available for every platform. So you're going to see LinkedIn missing from here because they just don't publish their data like this. So that is missing. But this is really interesting insight nonetheless. So Facebook, 2.7 million. That's actually, the growth has stopped a little bit, but it's still the biggest in terms of people that log in every single month. And it's these monthly active user numbers that we really need to care about, not total user numbers. It's these people that log in every month that actually matter to us. Then YouTube has grown really well. YouTube has grown 10% over the last year. So it was on 2 billion, now it's on 2.3. So it's actually closer to 15% really. YouTube is an underutilized channel as part of many people's marketing strategies. It's a real big one as far as I'm concerned. And the active users is fast approaching. It's actually outpacing Facebook in terms of growth at the moment. So YouTube should be a part of a strategy as far as I'm concerned. WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger has been quite static. A couple other things to call out. Instagram's seen really good growth, nearly 25% growth year over year, really encouraging. So 1.2 billion monthly actives. TikTok's growth has slowed, but it's still huge. So as you can see here, 689 million monthly actives. They were hoping to have crossed the 1 billion active user mark by now, but they haven't as yet, but still absolutely massive. Two other things just to call out. Pinterest has grown really, really well, as has Reddit. Reddit's an interesting one. It's underutilized from a UK content marketing perspective. And there's quite a lot of opportunity on Reddit because it's one of the few platforms on this that has not yet peaked. So they keep on growing month on month, whereas a lot of the other platforms have seen peak user growth, and that user growth has started to taper off. So that's quite an interesting one. So then let's kind of zoom in on this a little bit more. And I really love this slide because it represents some data that we don't often see. And this is about, if we think about all of these platforms and how this growth has manifested as like a platform usage perspective, we can start to look at platform overlaps. So this is the percentage of people aged 16 to 64 who use multiple social media platforms. So let me give you an example here. So if, for example, one of your kind of key content strategies is to be Instagram first. So as we can see, nearly 99% of Instagram users use another platform too. Well, that's good to know. But actually, if we start looking at this, we can see that YouTube has the highest likelihood to be used by Instagram users as well. So what that means is that if you are running an Instagram first strategy, you'd be well advised to include YouTube in that strategy as well, because it's likely that your target audience, if you think your target audience is on Instagram, they're going to be on YouTube as well, because there's a massive overlap, which then gives you an opportunity, or twice the opportunity, to get your message heard. This multi-channel approach to a strategy is fundamental, and I don't see everyone applying this logic. And there was some data that I spoke about in a different session, where some analysis has said there is a 35% ROI uplift for every channel that you include in your content strategy. So if you were just putting something out on Instagram, if you put it out on YouTube as well, you'll see a 35% ROI lift on average. Really important to think multi-channel, and data points like this really help you understand, okay, well, if I believe my audience is on Facebook, what other platforms should I feed into that? So Facebook example, YouTube would be a good one, Insta would be a good one, but potentially maybe Twitter, but outside of that, there's diminishing returns, I would say. So really interesting for your multi-channel strategy analysis. Zooming down a little bit into how people discover products and services, or do brand research ultimately. This data is really interesting. So these are the primary channels for brand research. Percentage of internet users 16 to 64 who use each channel as a primary source for information when researching brands. Search engines and social networks clearly are number 1 and 2. But interestingly, social networks is taking an increasingly larger share out of search engines. This was far more highly weighted towards search engines when we were looking at this data last year. So if we zoom in on the top two, right, search engines and social, because that is the thing that's really driving brand discovery. So that if we start to look at the dynamics in this, it becomes quite interesting. It actually, social becomes the predominant discovery tool for those 16 to 24, whereas search is still important, but actually is now being overtaken by social. And you can see a fairly even balanced split between 25 to 34, and it kind of diminishes the older the demographics get. But the reason I wanted to show this is because this is very interesting analysis for our content strategies, because we can start to prioritize. Do we focus more on SEO and getting our blogs ranking on Google, for example, or is our focus more about getting our content to get in as many people's feeds as possible, working with influencers or working with other ways that we're going to amplify our content through social? So that's a really important distinction based on who you're trying to target. So this can help us really like zero in on our content strategy. Zooming in a bit further, the use of social for brand research and at a demographic split perspective skews female for who leads with social media for brand research. So once again, this helps inform our broader content strategy. If we're targeting younger audience of younger females, for example, then a social first discovery strategy actually you'd be more advised to do that rather than focusing as much on SEO. But all of these data points give us some kind of further ammunition to make sure the decisions we're making as part of our broader content plan make strategic sense for us. And now appreciate this is some B2B data, whereas slightly different industry than what we're talking about here. But actually, I think it's interesting to get learnings from other industries as well to help, empower our more kind of public sector or kind of non-profit focus that we're talking about here. So these are marketing channels that have grown in importance for B2B brands. And there's a couple of interesting discovery points here. One, you can see webinars clearly becoming very, very important. It's kind of what we're doing right now. Okay, so that's interesting. You can see everyone weighting heavily towards that. But interesting for B2B brands, you can see that the second highest ranked is SEO, so search engine optimization, getting your content to rank in search, then email marketing, then tied fourth is social and LinkedIn ads. But it kind of tells me that B2B brands are potentially a little bit behind the curve as to where the market is going ultimately, where we can see more discovery happening through social. It would be nicer to see a more kind of balanced approach between SEO and social from a B2B brand perspective. And that's really just kind of legacy decisions that have led B2B brands to maybe not thinking as progressively as this data would suggest we need to. So it's really interesting to look at what industries are doing, what's happening in the broader world of digital trends, and we can start to think actually how do businesses or organizations, nonprofits or whatever, how do we catch up and make sure our strategy isn't out of kilter with what's happening in the broader market. This is a really important point, and it kind of summarizes everything we've just been discussing in the first part of this session, which is a 66% increase in the discovery of products through social in the last 4 years. The way people are discovering things, interacting with things has changed fundamentally, and it's changed forever. So really, really important. And I think, if you've seen anything throughout the first kind of 10 minutes of this, it is the importance of social to our broader communication strategy. Right, with that's the kind of trends bits done. So let's go right into the detail of what's going on. So let's go on to Facebook first. So I'm only going to call out 3 data points. All of this recording, where it's being recorded, and the slides I am happy to share as well. So I'm only going to talk about 3 data points in the interest of time, but these are the most important ones. So Facebook's grown, but its growth isn't as rapid as it once was. I mean, when you've got half the world using you, there is limitation on how quickly you can grow. But 48 million new users. It skews slightly more male as well in audience. The predominance of Facebook's audience is between 18 to 34, and that's probably the audience that skews mostly male as well. There's a split across demographics, but they're the ones that make up the lion's share. But if we look at the growth of the audience, however, you can start to see that skewing much, much to an older demographic. So significant growth of 65 plus or 55 to 64. And this is a really interesting thing and a really interesting dynamic, because the world of social is changing in terms of it isn't just about, kids adopting or teenagers adopting a new platform, a new technology. This is transcending generations. And that's really, in the last year, we've kind of moved forward significantly because we've had no choice than to get active on social, really. But this is a really healthy change when it comes to communicating our message and how we use social to communicate our message. So then let's look at Facebook's reach rankings. So the potential audience that we have in the UK, for example. So UK, 38 million. Hasn't grown, hasn't dropped, but keep that number in your mind, because this will become very interesting when we look at this same data for other platforms, may make you reevaluate some decisions. So 38 million. Engagement benchmarks. I always love looking at this stuff. Important point, however, in how this is calculated. This engagement has been calculated on the number of engagements against the overall page followers or fans, ultimately. So I prefer, and the better way to calculate engagement is reach divided by engagement. So like, shares, comments, reactions, etc. So this is about total followers. So these engagement benchmarks will look lower than you might expect, but still gives us a good benchmark, especially when we use this same data to compare like Facebook and Instagram, as we'll do in a minute. Important thing you need to take away from this is that link posts bomb, they don't do well at all. But actually all other post formats do fairly the same. You know, average is a 0.11% engagement rate. Photo posts do the best. Video does slightly worse if you look at an average in terms of engagement. So take away from that is that don't feel pressured to have to do video content. You'll see lots of advice about, you know, you should be on video, it has to be video. It doesn't necessarily. The quality of the content, not the format of it, is the thing that's most important. Into specific features, this is a really important one for anyone that's advertising on Facebook. You can now exclude your content from appearing next to topics you don't want it to. So for example, if you were an organization that was selling, male grooming products, you wouldn't want that to appear next to in a page of like children's toys, for example. Random example, but you know, you don't really want, for your brand, you do want to consider placement, and always that's been a bit of the Wild West as far as social media is concerned about brand placement. So now you can start to make sure that your content is not, your advertising content is not shown next to anything you don't want it to be. Australia news ban, outdated already. They've reversed this already, but to be honest, there's so many geopolitical things that are going to play out with Facebook that is fascinating to watch. Not just the battle with Australian government, but the battle with Apple that's going on at the moment as well. We can't take any actions from that, but you know, we'll talk about this every single month because there are definitely some interesting geopolitical moves happening at Facebook. Interesting to watch. If we go on to Instagram, let's look at some kind of the similar kind of benchmarks. So Facebook grew 44 million. Instagram grew quicker at 63 million. Skews slightly more female, but it's quite a balanced mix in terms of demographic. The audience, 18 to 34. So a very similar audience, predominant audience demographic, actually, of, you know, the same as Facebook ultimately, although just slightly lower percentages at the older age of the spectrum. But fundamentally, 18 to 34 is typically social media's sweet spot. The change, however, is really balanced, actually. So there is a good mix. You can see that unlike Facebook, Instagram's still growing with a younger demographic, which means good things for the growth of Instagram long term. And you can see that that kind of curve is balanced out where you've got growth in an older demographic too. So that's a really good mix. So Instagram actually is performing really well, as denoted by its growth and by a nice balance in mix of the demographics that are increasing with it. UK ranks very highly for Instagram reach. So Facebook was 38 million in the UK. Its average reach, and now, you know, look at Instagram, it's 31 million. So actually, from a UK specific perspective, Instagram is not far behind Facebook in terms of the reach opportunity we have, and you can see that's growing very, very quickly, which is really encouraging to see. So it means a lot for UK users. So some benchmarks for you, some slightly different ones to what we showed in the Facebook one. Monthly growth in followers. So as long as you're performing more than kind of 1.68% in your month-to-month growth of followers, you're doing well. Average posts, how many times a day should I post, is a question I get asked all the time. There isn't a hard and fast reason or kind of rationale to this, but the average, in case you want to know, is 1.56. So between 1 to 2 posts a day is typically what people are doing. Interestingly, though, when we look at the benchmarks, these are about 700% up on what Facebook's are. So there's still much better engagement potential on Instagram. It performs much better than Facebook for engagement. That engagement level is still dropping over time, and your reach will always constrict over time. And that's just an indictment of having more and more features as products get more mature. That being said, does represent significant opportunity over and above Facebook because of the average engagement is so much higher. So as you can see, average engagement for all post types is 85%, 0.85%. Photos do pretty well, much better than videos again. So this is kind of interesting, surprising to me actually, that this jives with what we just saw with Facebook, is that video content doesn't necessarily perform better than anything else. Carousels are marginally better, not enough to completely change your content strategy to focus on carousels, but they do perform a little bit better. Just videos don't seem to be doing very well. Onto the features. They are about to launch multi-person live streams. Sorry about the screenshot here. It was taken from Facebook's press material, but I have no idea what on earth is going on in this multi-live stream. Ultimately, this is a really important update though, because it now allows you to go live with other people. So it allows you to kind of essentially manifest what you would do like in a webinar, like we're doing right now, but using Instagram Live. Fantastic collaborative opportunity, great way of kind of, dividing and conquering, if you will, which means that if like Joanne and I are going live today at the same time, which means that both of our audiences get a notification of such. So it's a great way to kind of maximize your audience through collaboration. So I really like this as an opportunity. It's launching very, very soon. This is an important one. Instagram is deprioritizing content shared from other apps, particularly TikTok. One thing that TikTok had is the ability to create something in TikTok with a little TikTok watermark and make that easy to share to Instagram. That is no longer a thing. Instagram don't want that to happen. The only way of getting good performing content on Instagram is to make sure it's either shared natively, i.e. uploaded to Instagram directly or through Facebook Creator Studio, or by using a third-party tool like Content Cal, for example. So yeah, a point to note, if you're resharing content across multiple platforms, make sure you're using a scheduling tool to do it. Don't try and use other apps to repost content between different platforms, because certainly from an Instagram perspective, they are not liking it anymore. I don't usually talk about tests in this stuff because I like to talk about actionable stuff, but I think this is actually a really important thing to know regarding Instagram, is that with Instagram, as you know, if you're going through the stories, you're swiping left to right to go through your stories. What Instagram want to happen is for the experience of Instagram to be more like TikTok, whereby you are going through stories in more of a vertical scroll and essentially not getting to the end of those stories. That's the really powerful thing about TikTok. It's a kind of infinite scroll, i.e. you can just go down a content rabbit hole for hours because you won't hit the end of it. And that's where Instagram are going, which means for people that are posting to Instagram, good use of hashtags is critical, because that's the way your content will carry on being discovered, which will mean that if people are spending more time just scrolling, that means more opportunity for our content to be discovered. So that's the kind of business impact. On to LinkedIn. So LinkedIn's growth has slowed down a bit. It grew really well at the start of 2020, but slowed down, skews more male in demographic as we might expect. Once again, 25 to 34 being the core age. Most other networks are kind of 18 to 34, but you're clear, like on LinkedIn, is 25 to 34 is the core age, skewing slightly male. But interestingly, like we saw with Facebook and Instagram, particularly Instagram, is that UK ranks really highly for reach on LinkedIn. It's growing well. And this was really interesting and fascinating to me when I was looking at this data, is that, Facebook is 38 million, Instagram 31 million, LinkedIn 30 million. So actually it's not far behind both of those two in terms of opportunity and reach. So yeah, really interesting. The power of LinkedIn is significant, especially, unfortunately, they don't share these engagement benchmarks, but from my own experience, engagement on LinkedIn is fantastic at the moment. So organic reach is doing really, really well on LinkedIn. So in terms of new features, not too much to announce, but they've just announced Marketplace, which is a really interesting development. They only announced it yesterday, which basically allows people to transact services on on LinkedIn. So if you need like a freelance like copywriter or a consultant or whatever, LinkedIn is now going to be turned into that marketplace. So you can offer services and people can procure those services. So really, if you ever use platforms like Fiverr or Upwork, basically like freelance marketplaces where you put in a job and people bid for that job and you hire people through the platform, that's where LinkedIn are going. I'm excited and concerned about this in equal measure. Excited because it gives us an opportunity to expand our network and find good people to work with. And also, if you were a freelancer, a great way of like getting yourself hired, but also equally because it takes it away from being a social networking platform as far as I'm concerned. So interesting what happens with that. So Twitter, its growth has kind of tailed off significantly. So as you can see, I mean, to be honest, they still added 387,000 new users. Sometimes it's hard to comprehend how big the numbers were. If 387,000 people use Content Cal, I would be really happy. So yeah, putting it in perspective, it's not like it's going anywhere. But in terms of the other platform growth, it's a bit stagnant at the moment, and skews very heavily male as well. So as you can see, the demographics shift a bit older actually on Twitter. Twitter's got one of the oldest demographics out of all of them, and definitely more heavily male skewed. Maybe that's where all the negativity comes from. I don't know. And UK ranks really highly for Twitter reach. Has dropped a little bit. As you can see, quite a lot of the top ones have dropped. So UK 16.5 million potential reach. So it's about half what LinkedIn is and what Instagram is as well. This is a really interesting one for Twitter. They've acquired, and I think this is one of the most important points to actually take away from this, which might seem a little bit random. They've bought a newsletter app called Review. And why that's important is that what they're doing with this is they're going to start allowing people to start creating more private communities on Twitter. Now, LinkedIn did this last month. LinkedIn now have the ability to allow you to create a newsletter and have subscribers to that newsletter. So I appreciate I'm talking about LinkedIn for a second, but I'll link it back to Twitter in a moment. But this opportunity on LinkedIn now really helps us start to carve out a real kind of engaged community out of our broader following base. Because sometimes we kind of confuse and conflate our community by talking about our social followers. The vast majority of our social followers don't engage or don't do anything, so they're not really a community as such. A community is one that engages and interacts. So let's just say you had 1,000 followers on LinkedIn. 500 of them maybe are kind of more active and engaged. The other 500 have just followed you for whatever reason. So for those 500 people, we can now start to, and this is on LinkedIn, create a newsletter and get subscriptions from those, which means that when we create a new long form piece of content, a newsletter, funnily enough, or a blog or whatever, we can now send that to our subscribers on LinkedIn. That is available now. And that's really powerful because it's kind of like the rise of, private or owned communities, if you will. And it also means that you're not at the behest of or beholden to a algorithm to deliver that content to people. I mean, essentially, if someone subscribes to your newsletter and you send it, it's going to them. Whether they read it or not is a different matter. So that was LinkedIn. They did that last month. And I called this out because Twitter are doing the same through this purchase of Review. I'm seeing a lot happening around this kind of like, I mean, it's quite a dated concept, right? Newsletter and subscribing to a newsletter. It doesn't seem particularly innovative, but it seems to be growing significantly. If you want to dive into this into any more detail, there's a product called Substack, which is growing really well, incredibly well, actually. And it allows people to create newsletters and publish that to subscribers and also monetize that audience if they ever want to. But it just shows to me like the rise of private communities on social. Smaller, more niche community is where it's at, which has been, this has been the way it's going for a long time, especially through the rise of Facebook groups over time. So sticking with Twitter, Audio Spaces is their Clubhouse competitor. They're doing lots of stuff to update this to really, they've been outpaced by Clubhouse on this. So they're kind of moving very quickly to make sure they've got a comparable product to Clubhouse. So audio first social media is probably worthy of a whole different discussion, this one. Having spent a bit of time in Clubhouse myself, I really enjoy it, and there's great content opportunity for those that like a more kind of rich, in depth, and a more of a conversation. Has a good opportunity to like build that tighter, more private community that we're talking about. Audio spaces on Twitter. Twitter are kind of really hoping that this gives it the kind of shot in the arm that it needs to drive better engagement, to drive better user satisfaction. So that's definitely one to keep an eye on, because they're going to be promoting that really heavily over the coming few months. Pinterest, I'm actually going to gloss over Pinterest because it doesn't actually matter too much. The updates that they've made are mostly around kind of e-commerce functions, so it doesn't actually matter too much for this particular update for this audience. YouTube's an interesting one. So this year they are going to, and I think this will be the case, not been guaranteed, but I think they're going to make this available for everyone. So this is YouTube Shorts. This is it's their competitor to TikTok, which is a like 15-second video thing. The reason I want to call this out, because YouTube's underutilized in the UK, and YouTube is growing faster than any other platform. It really has an unprecedented content opportunity. So I really like YouTube, and Shorts could potentially offer a really nice way to get into YouTube better without having to worry about doing long form videos. You can do short form videos on this. Currently, it's only available to certain creators, so it's not generally available, but this will be an opportunity when this is made generally available some point later in this year. So this is more of a kind of FYI. Snapchat, interesting one. Media stopped talking about Snapchat a bit, but there's a lot happening. So Snapchat have grown really well, 65 million increase in users. So they've actually grown more users in the last quarter than any other network. So that's good to know. It's the only network as well outside of Pinterest that skews quite heavily female orientated. So depending on your demographic, this Snapchat could be a really interesting element to add to your strategy if you're targeting mostly a female audience. As you can see, it's very heavily weighted, and it's more definitive in terms of the age demographics here, more heavily weighted into a younger audience, but not overly so. It used to be like, oh, Snapchat's used by teenagers. This data would show that it's absolutely not. 18 to 34 is the lion's share of the users, and actually 25 to 34 as a total user base. If you look between female and male, that's where the predominant audience is. So actually, Snapchat's not about teenagers, has quite a lot of them on it, but ultimately, it's for the broader audience. Snapchat released Spotlight, which is, once again, their competitor to TikTok. Haven't TikTok shaken up a lot and got everyone their game? But ultimately, they released Spotlight, which is their approach to TikTok. And not immediately, in a month, have got 100 million active users. It's grown really quickly. And then, as you can see here, they've added 16 million users, 62% revenue growth, and now 265 million people log in every single day to use Snapchat. So it's growing at a ridiculous rate, and a Spotlight has been its shot in the arm, to use that phrase again, to really accelerate the growth of it. So really interested in that. I was going to talk about Clubhouse briefly, but all I've got to say is that it got blocked in China. That's all that happened over the last month. But if you're not aware of Clubhouse, this is definitely one to start thinking about. I think there's massive opportunity here, especially for the types of content that is more in-depth and requires much more kind of thought in it. And that's why I'm kind of interested in Clubhouse's approach. I'm interested in more kind of Joanne's thoughts on this as well, about like how Clubhouse can be used more in like a public sector non-profit type of scenario, because actually the opportunity to build community on there, having had my first few experiences of running Clubhouse sessions, I'm quite excited about the opportunity within it. So any questions you have for me on that, I'm happy to go into them. TikTok, skew slightly male. We don't have data of user growth, unfortunately, but yeah, TikTok is absolutely massive. I'm going to gloss over this one. This is a really interesting one. Whilst the application of this might not be absolutely like bang on for what you might want to do, like I think the use of this and the application of social here is really interesting. So they partnered with recipe app called Whisk. Now, the actual fact is a recipe app doesn't matter too much, but the interesting thing is here is about their use of call to actions in content. So let's give it this example, right? Food content does really well on TikTok, as it does on any social platform, right? The preparation of food. But of course, any content you create should have a purpose and should lead to something. Historically, on other social channels, let's say that we were promoting a webinar. We'd put out a post and saying like, give it some waffle, and then we'd have a link to that webinar. We'd either make the post a link post, or we'd maybe put the link in the comments. But ultimately, that's all we've got in our armory. If we want to direct someone to elsewhere, we're going to put a link in our content. But that's actually a really bad user experience, because someone has to stop what they're doing. If they're interested, they'll click it, open up a new tab, register for whatever you want them to do, and they have to come back and start scrolling again. That's a bad experience. What TikTok are very cognizant of is the fact that actually you want to have a brilliant user experience when you're on social. So with their kind of partnership with apps, and this recipe app is a good one, you notice, you probably won't be able to see this, it says here where I'm hovering my mouse, like see full recipe, which allows people to kind of consume the content and watch this tasty meal being prepared and be like, oh, click to view the full recipe. And that just kind of opens up that recipe in a different app, which allows people to kind of follow or download or whatever that call to action is, and then can carry back on scrolling. It's a much more kind of native integrated call to action. And I really like that, because it's much more inherently social. And also it means that, networks have typically penalized like link posts, because social media networks don't want you to link out to something else for obvious reasons. This approach from TikTok allows you to kind of embed links into the content itself. So you're not going to get penalized for this, because you're creating a great experience for the users. I am going to I'm going to mention this actually. Inside this is something to do some reading on. I think I'm going to give a bit of a summary on this, but I think this is the future of social media unfolding. And Walmart have some shady business practices, which I'm going to kind of brush under the carpet for now whilst I praise them. What they've done here with their kind of, it says TikTok influencers here, but it's like TikTok and Instagram. What they've basically done, they've got about 800,000 stores across the UK, and they have created a social media ambassador in each of those, using their own personal profile to represent what they're doing, tell the story, not just of the brand, but tell the story of themselves, but also, naturally representing the brand at the same time. And they have kind of enabled that army of what they're called TikTok influencers. And that has had significant results for the business. Because if you imagine, you've gone from one central Walmart social media profile on Instagram, for example, to 800,000 of your staff members with their own personal Instagram account telling the story. That there is a whole world of complexity underneath that. I would recommend searching this. So just if you got spare 10 minutes, search inside Walmart's army of TikTok influencers. It's a brilliant article. It's a really recent article, and I wanted to bring this up because for me, it demonstrates the future of social. Social media should be happening on the personal profiles, and if you can find a way to leverage them alongside your brand profiles, that's where the growth is. So what can we take from all of this? So it's a summary piece, and wow, I'm actually nearly going to end at a time that I should do. Platform demographics are changing, and platforms are offering increasing new features to try. Be open-minded in your channel approach. What I mean here is that let's take Snapchat. We might not have considered it for our strategy, but if we're targeting a female demographic of a certain age range, maybe that's something to bring into our strategy now. Just because we're not familiar with Snapchat doesn't mean it shouldn't be in our strategy, for example. And the same applies for YouTube and the other platforms that I've mentioned. The rise of owned communities, so the whole kind of newsletter thing that I was talking about, the importance of those kind of more private communities, people that feel like they're communicating on a one-to-one basis. So that could be through newsletters on LinkedIn or Twitter, or it could be through having a more smaller community where you have a conversation, once a week on Clubhouse, for example. Those smaller owned communities are one of the kind of future items of social, a really important part. It's not about building, hundreds of thousands of followers. It's not about numbers. It's about engagement and interaction. The importance of a multi-channel approach. Hopefully most people were thinking multi-channel before this call, but hopefully that chart with the percentages across all of the different platforms helped you understand the opportunity that exists when you think multi-channel. So important that you think about all of these different social channels and how people are split between them when we're creating our content strategy. The way people are discovering products is changing, leaning towards social. As I said, 66% increase in the last 4 years of people discovering products through social. The way people are promoting products is changing. Take the Walmart example. They are leading the way in this, and hopefully other brands can follow suit. And then finally, we haven't spoken about this, but there was a good data point I wanted to call out as the final note on this. Humanizing, differentiating through purpose. More than a quarter of people within the last year have bought online due to a company's values. What an important message that is. And that is the power of like the human element of social. In the same way that one of the biggest companies in the world, Walmart, have realized the power of the people behind their brand. That is the most powerful thing they have. That's the way of people believe the values from an individual. So that is your kind of unique differentiator. And I know it's difficult when we're working for like larger organizations, but trying to make the most human approach to our social content as possible will serve us incredibly well. And with that, back to the studio. So let me stop sharing.
Thanks, Andy. What a whirlwind tour of social over the past month. I was furiously writing down notes in the Facebook group and just the key takeaways. I really enjoyed it. I'm sure everybody else did. Couple of things that I want to talk about from a government and public sector perspective. First thing that you've touched on was the rise of social for brand discovery. Now, you know, I've always been harping on, as probably you have, about the power and the importance of search for brand discovery, especially direct traffic, where somebody goes to Google and puts in your organization's name. But now they're doing it to great effect on social, and this is becoming the norm. That's a major shift, right, for the social platforms.
It's a huge shift. It's a huge shift, and it means it's harder to control from an organization perspective. So if you want to rank first in SEO, there's typically some rules that you can apply, right? It's hard graft, but you can apply to them. In social, there's a lot more dynamic happening in this. So, and it's not just about your own channels. So the content you put out on your own social media channels, it's about what other people say about you. So working with other like-minded individuals in the space, just like in the same way that you and I are doing today, Joanne, is a really important opportunity for social to when people are starting to discover you and starting to research things on social, it's so important about what other people say about you. So making sure you've got an approach where other people can talk about your organization and working in collaboration with as many people as you possibly can is fundamental to that growth. And I think the very interesting thing here, and the final point I'll mention on this, the other dynamic, is that since Instagram, I think it was last month, they introduced the ability to search Instagram. So you could search Instagram for, I don't know, Public Sector Marketing Institute, and you would find all content related to that. You couldn't have searched it before. So now you have the ability to search it. And I think if you're an organization, it's so important to search that regularly, or at least use any kind of social media like listening tools to see what people are saying about you and be active and respond to that content that people are speaking about you in. So yeah, requires a lot more management, I would say, but the opportunity is absolutely there.
The other big takeaway from government and public sector point of view that they should be considering is really the multi-stream option on Instagram. You know, going live on Insta has been great, but now we can have multi-person live streams and really taking advantage of other people's audiences, as you said, just like we're doing here, because in the public sector, the conversion is the scalability of the message and increasing citizen engagement and trust and transparency. This seems like a big deal and a big opportunity.
Oh, 100%. I love it. Things where you can work with others to expand the message, whatever that message is, massive opportunity. And especially for something like, that's kind of rich and in depth, because the content that your audience might well be talking about is something that's more in depth. It isn't something that you could just be like, one and done, or put out on a kind of trivial story post. It's in depth. So Instagram Live, absolutely love it. Multi-stream, absolutely brilliant. So yeah, excited to see that one. It's not out yet, but they're expecting it to be out this week, I think. So yeah, you might want to just keep an eye out for that.
Clubhouse, as we know, is still invite only, but I tell you what, maybe they're regretting that now, because we've seen Twitter take their thunders, Facebook trying to get into the mix, and we have Bobby who's watching on Facebook said, what about the fireside chat app, where it's almost like, a podcast, listening to a podcast, and then as a listener you can contribute.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, great shout on the fireside app. So yeah, Mark Cuban is one of the investors in that, and he's helping to build it. So it has a lot of financial firepower behind it. Basically, I love it. The interactive kind of podcast style I think it's a content format that has great mileage, because ultimately it's kind of like the old radio phone-in show ultimately, right? So I think it's a really interesting format. Anything that allows you to engage in a deeper conversation with an audience and allows you to kind of interact in a forum like you've got here, where you're asking questions, we're doing them in real time. Any kind of manifestation of that is brilliant. And if you can do it in a platform that has a ready-made audience for you, whether that's Instagram Live, or whether that's Clubhouse or Fireside or Twitter Audio Spaces, or doing it in those kind of platforms has a huge potential. And just a note on Twitter Audio Spaces is that if you do currently have a Twitter following, my suggestion would be to focus more on Twitter Audio Spaces than Clubhouse. Clubhouse is shiny and new, and it feels like, oh, I want an invite. And I have got some spare invites. If anyone wants one, they can drop a message in the chat. I'll send them over. But outside of that, it's not worth the hype in its own right. Absolutely not. It's an opportunity. It's a platform. But if Twitter get this right, Twitter have like I was saying, 350 million monthly active users compared to Clubhouse's 1 million. So Clubhouse has grown quickly, but in a patch on Twitter in terms of its scale. So if Twitter gets it right, it will have the momentum behind it.
And the other great feature, even though Twitter's growth is not at the scale of the other social networks, hey, acquiring the newsletter app Review and introducing email marketing as mainstream and connecting social and email marketing within one app, I thought that was a genius move, to be honest, because
Love it.
My students and people who are in my tribe will know that I promote social, but the full digital marketing funnel. And at social, they're at the top. Yes, it's growing in prominence in terms of brand discovery, but we need to get them into owned spaces. Do you think that Twitter are going to win on this one?
I don't know. I don't know about winning, to be honest. I couldn't call that. I'm excited to see what happens. I'm as excited as you. Like the way you've articulated that is bang on the money, right? Yeah, combining email and social together, that to me makes a great deal of sense. But in terms of winning, I don't think it's about winning or losing. Ultimately, it's a case of we have an opportunity to be on as many platforms as we need to. LinkedIn is one of the only ones that have this functionality at the moment. Great. I'd be thinking about potentially testing this kind of newsletter and subscription stuff on LinkedIn, on the platforms that, we might not be first in our strategy right now, LinkedIn, but it's actually a good one to test on because it's available. And then kind of keep an eye on what's happening with Twitter's rollout of newsletters, and then kind of double down on that, safe in the knowledge that you've kind of got a bit of experience of how the experience will work. That would be my point. But ultimately, it's not winning or losing. It's about trying to be as many places as you possibly can, really. And once you started to see some good signs of growth, then that's when you have the opportunity to go, right, well, I've seen X amount on Clubhouse. I've done X amount for Instagram TV Live, X amount for, Instagram Live. And I've done I've seen these results using my Twitter or LinkedIn newsletter subscriptions. Once you've kind of analyzed that after kind of months worth of testing this stuff, then you can start to double down. Absolutely. And in your mind, you can say, right, well, LinkedIn did better for me or Twitter did better for me. And it's not about winning or losing. It's about trying these things, putting some time to experiment on the platforms that we have and experimenting with the new opportunities we get given each month. Run one new experiment each month, see if it works, and then evaluate from there. So I think what we've proven in the world of social media is that there is room for plenty of platforms. The world is a big place, and there is a huge amount split across these multiple platforms. So there's a lot of opportunity and a lot to win.
And I know we don't want to get too political, but I for one can't ignore, and I know that it was a big impact for government and public sector in Australia this week. So we know that at the beginning of the week that, and it was threatened that Facebook was going to remove its content in the Australian market because the Australian government believed that Facebook should recompense media outlets for the content that they're producing. Because as we know, Google and Facebook make money, and directly and indirectly, from the news content that is there, because on average across the globe, over 50% of people get their news from a social media source. So they couldn't strike a deal. Facebook removed all its content, but Facebook removed its content in Australia from news. But what also happened was that we saw that government and public sector agencies were also affected. I think that was super, super dangerous in a time where we're living through a pandemic and we need to rely on trusted sources, that being media and that being government and public sector. I'm not sure that was a good look for Facebook. Now, today, as you mentioned, they reversed the decision and they've struck a deal. I, for one, feel this is the beginning of some sort of regulation. I don't know what you think, but I don't think this is the end of it. I think it's the start.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I wouldn't want to comment on what I think is going to happen because I might well be wrong. But everything you said, you articulated this beautifully. It's fascinating, and I'm really pleased that this has kind of played out in public as it's done, and they've rode back on it because it was a foolish decision. They made themselves look like a child ultimately, and made them realize that they've been campaigning that they're not a monopoly, yet they do that, which absolutely undermines everything that they've been saying that they're not. Which they hold too much power, and it's good on the Australian government for digging their heels in and going to war on this, because that means that the precedent has now been set. So hopefully we won't see any more of this happening in other countries. Because I think Facebook have not exactly covered themselves in glory over the last week.
And we have to be, we're all Facebook fans, whether we say that we're not fans. We kind of are, because we're calling our friends and family on Messenger. We have a million WhatsApp groups for every aspect of our life owned by Facebook. We have Facebook profiles. We like business pages. We're swiping up on Instagram to get the Instagram influencers product code. So, we all have to be honest. Life without Facebook would be very, very different. And, we are using it. But I think that the technologies, like in all parts of tech, is moving quicker than legislation or than legislators can keep up. So it's not a conversation or a topic that we can get the answer to today. Suffice to say, the role of government and public sector and being trusted sources is really, really important. Getting your verified tick, making sure that your content rises to the top because it's a trusted source. I think that's what Facebook needs, actually. I think the collaborations between news media and government and public sector and trusted sources and these platforms needs to be closer without the lines being blurred, because the rules of engagement are such now that we've got hacking happening every single day. We've got rip-off merchants there. Then we have this where news is being taken off of Facebook as a product. So this is definitely one area that I'm going to watch. So Andy, kind of as to wrap up, What is your one big feature takeaway for this month? If you were to leave us with your wisdom and to tell us what one thing we should test, because I really loved your suggestion that we should test one thing a month. What should we all go away and test this month?
I think you've already brought it up, to be honest. So I would, if you have a business page on LinkedIn, go ahead and test newsletters and subscriptions for that. I haven't tested it too much. It was released. I only found out about it 2 weeks ago. So, maybe that's a little project, bit of homework for us all. Go back and report some results for next month. Who knows? But I'm really excited about anything that provides more kind of owned community, things that we can control as much as we possibly can. Because as you perfectly articulated, we're at a point in time where we need as much trust as we possibly can. So, the audience on this call are trusted purveyors of information. So having a trusted community that you can have that one-to-one relationship with, I think that's a beautiful evolution of social. There'll be casual browsers of your content, and there'll be people that really want to go in depth on the subject, and I love that.
Okay, because we're collaborating on this too, let people know where they can go and find out more about you and Content Cal, as a really important partner in social and bringing social and content together.
Oh, thank you. So find me on LinkedIn, Andy Lambert, always talking about this kind of stuff. So yeah, follow me and we'll chat. And then you'll find us on contentcal.io. So as you can probably expect, you can probably see from my background that's have something to do with Content Cal. But yes, outside of dressing up and all of the Content Cal merch, you can find out about us there. There's a free trial that you can test out, but it's really where you can bring your content strategy to life. Is the reason we built the product.
Well, thank you so much for the first installment of Social Media News. We will see you back, same time, same place, different month. So the last Tuesday of March. And congratulations to the UK on fast tracking getting out of lockdown. I think everybody is watching from Ireland. At least we're very interested in Boris Johnson's press conference yesterday. We're hoping to get back to the pub by June 21st also.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, thank you for allowing me to be part of this, Joanne. Speak to you soon.
All right. Bye. See you guys.
Bye.